Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and provide a bit of an antidote to the Conservative Liberal love-in that's been taking place in the House of Commons today over CETA, and I hope. Well, you can't deny it's been pretty cozy. When you get the International Trade Minister and the International Trade Critic of the Liberals and Conservatives respectively hugging in the House of Commons over a deal, I think it's fair to say if there was anything you could call a love-in, that's what you could call a love-in within Parliament. And so that happened on the day they signed the deal, and it's continued throughout this debate, Madam Speaker. So I'm pleased to rise and provide a different perspective, a perspective that frankly is shared by many Canadians and many people across North America who are fed up, and that energy needs to be channeled in the right way, but are fed up with having this kind of condescending claptrap from parties and politicians that have as their allies big business, who every time you criticize the fact that in some cases these deals have meant good jobs leaving the country, are told, you just don't understand trade. Well, you're just against trade. The NEP is for trade, and we understand well the importance of trade for our local economy and for workers. But, you know, Madam Speaker, I think insurance is a good idea. And, you know, we could pontificate on the history of insurance and how it came to be, because some things weren't the way they should be, and families ended up in dire straits, and so insurance is a great product, and we should, of course, have insurance. You wouldn't take any insurance policy and sign it without reading it. So it's not about whether you're for or against insurance that you decline a particular policy or not, and it's not that the NEP is against trade that we say this particular deal has problems with it. And on balance, we think the problems are not worth the proposed benefits. And when you hear members speak, what you hear them say is, we're in favor of the possible benefit, of the potential market. What we haven't seen from the government is a province-by-province analysis of what this is going to mean for jobs. We haven't seen a sector-by-sector analysis, Madam Speaker, to say who are the winners going to be and who are the losers going to be. Now, in some cases, we do have a sense of who the losers are going to be, and we know that they're in the ag sector. We know that the former government negotiated a settlement with some of those producers to the tune of over $4 billion. Well, nothing's changed in the agreement, and presumably nothing's changed in terms of the consequences for those producers, but this government has arbitrarily lowered that compensation package. So, but what we haven't heard, what they haven't said is, why are we hurting those producers? And why is it worth spending taxpayer money to compensate those producers, even though they're not doing it to the extent that the Conservatives saw fit? Because these people over here are going to win, and these are the jobs that are going to be created, and these are the businesses that are just waiting with an export development plan to move their business into Europe and to actually capture that market, instead of just talking about the paper access that we're buying, and not inexpensively, Madam Speaker, as we go through some of the other items in this deal. I was talking to a farmer in Manitoba just last week who was saying that for certain ag products, Madam Speaker, it's true, there are quotas on what can be exported from Canada into Europe, and it's true that CETA raises those quotas. That's great. It would be even better if those ag producers were actually meeting the existing quotas, but they aren't. So, you know, we're going to sign up for certain investor-state dispute settlement clauses. We're going to sign up for an agreement that will interfere with the ability of local governments to use buy local provisions in their procurement. We're going to sign on to a higher cost of drugs. And why? To expand a quota that isn't already being met, Madam Speaker? When you talk about trade-offs, it seems to me that the kind of theoretical benefit of an expanded quota that producers aren't already meeting is not worth the very concrete costs that are represented in, for example, higher drug costs. Now, that's an argument the Liberals should understand. It's comparable to an argument they made about the tax-free savings account when they reduced that threshold. They said, look, why would you increase the threshold from $5,000 to $10,000 when most people aren't already availing themselves of a $5,000 limit? The very same argument. So why would you incur higher drug costs, which is a very real cost for Canadians, in exchange for higher quotas on certain ag products when those quotas aren't already being met, Madam Speaker? So I think we need to come down to earth a little bit and stop making this a debate about whether you're for or against trade. The member from Calgary Rocky Ridge in his speech said said that he wanted to talk about what was in the agreement and whether on balance certain things were better or not. And then he launched into a diatribe against the NEP just for saying, we actually think there's some problems with stuff in the agreement. And I didn't hear him once mention something that he thought was problematic in the agreement. So I don't know how you could conceptualize a debate on the content of an agreement and the nature of the trade-offs without actually mentioning any of the trade-offs, but just launching into a platitudinous speech about how wonderful this is without concrete examples. So I've mentioned already, Madam Speaker, that part of the problem here, if you want to get real and assess an agreement, is that there's not enough information to do that. We don't actually have anything approaching a comprehensive study by the government released to Canadians talking about what the impact on jobs and industry in Canada is going to be. We don't know what the relative impact from province to province is going to be. We don't know how the various sectors are going to be affected. We don't know, frankly, and you couldn't know, the economic impact of everything that's being given up in this agreement without a blink, because this agreement covers everything except for what's carved out. So there are certain carve-outs, for instance, on the buy local provisions. Some provincial governments have advocated to say this sector shouldn't be touched and that sector shouldn't be touched. But what that gives up, Madam Speaker, is everything we haven't already thought of. So if members in this House think that they're so smart, and everyone in provincial legislatures is so smart, as to have thought of every technological and economic development that's going to happen over the lifetime of this agreement, which incidentally is not a temporary agreement, Madam Speaker, then so be it. I'm a little more modest. I think we ought to be more modest. There's a lot of things that can change. We live in a world that changes very quickly, and I think it's imprudent at best to sign on to agreements that essentially give up everything that you haven't already thought of. So we don't know what the impact of that is going to be, and no one has said why it's a good idea to sign that kind of agreement that essentially covers everything we haven't already thought of versus an agreement that just covers the things that we are talking about and the sectors that we know about today and some of those particular trade-offs, Madam Speaker. I think on the face of it, that seems like a better approach. We also don't know, with Britain recently having had a referendum to leave the European Union, we just don't know what the impact or consequence of that is going to be. We do know that it's going to take years for European governments or parliaments to ratify this agreement. So why we're in such a rush here in Canada, I just simply don't understand, Madam Speaker. I haven't heard a good answer. We heard one member say, well, I don't see a need to put the brakes on a good deal. How do you know if it's a good deal when you don't even know who's in it yet? Is the member saying that it's immaterial to the benefit of the agreement to Canada whether Britain is covered by the agreement or not? That's a ridiculous thing to try and maintain, Madam Speaker. And if you don't do that, if you take the sensible approach and say, yeah, you know what, actually it does matter whether the United Kingdom is covered under CETA or not, and that has an impact on what the potential benefits are for Canada, then the right thing to do would be to put the brakes on and take a little bit of a wait-and-see approach. The agreement's not going anywhere, and I think it would be far more prudent to come back to it when we actually have a better sense of what the lay of the land is. It's a time of a lot of change and uncertainty, and to me, that says it's the wrong time to jump with both feet into a major economic treaties, Madam Speaker. There is, with this agreement, a problem that's a recurring problem, in my view, with a lot of the trade agreements that we've signed since 1993, which is the investor-state dispute settlement clauses. Now, in my mind, Madam Speaker, those have very little to do with trade. Foreign investors who have an issue and don't feel that they've been treated fairly can go to Canadian courts, Madam Speaker, and can seek fairness in Canadian courts, and can do that without tying the hands of government in terms of its ability to regulate for the benefit of the environment, for the benefit of workplace health and safety, for health benefits, Madam Speaker. That's a reasonable approach. There's nothing wrong with that. When you take it out of the hands of the Canadian court system that have certain principles of openness and transparency that I think we would all agree are important. No one's advocating we get rid of those principles in the Canadian court system, and you transfer that decision-making power to international trade tribunals for which we don't have the rules or the guidelines according to which arbiters are going to be selected, you're doing serious damage to the ability of Canadians to make their own decisions.
So, I understand the member still had lots to say, I'm sure, but he'll be able to do it through questions and comments given that the time has expired for his speech. Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Chambly. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. He talked about the fact that a number of members have spoken out in favor of the deal, of this deal. They said it's great news. They really want the opportunity to study the deal in depth. And that's what the committee will do. But I don't want to get too tangled up in parliamentary procedure. But the committee, contrary to 99% of cases, the committee is not going to accept written briefs from witnesses who can't travel or make the time to appear before the committee, or that the committee won't have time to hear from. I think it's very worrisome. I think it's very important to hear all voices with an issue like this, all points of view. So I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say about that problem, which is unprecedented, really, before a parliamentary committee. The honourable member for Elmwood, Transcona. Thanks very much for the question. I think there's a lesson here about the cynicism people feel around the CETA consultations as opposed to the electoral reform process. Because in the CETA case, the Liberals don't want all Canadians to have the opportunity to make a written submission. They just don't want to hear it. They don't want to know what Canadians think, even though this is a huge deal with implications that will be around for a long, long time. But on electoral reform, they've held multiple consultations among members, among ministers, with a special committee. They've even done online consultations. And now they want to hold consultations by mail. So when they like something, the idea of doing something, they consult broadly and they never stop talking about it. But when they don't like something, they go ahead without consultation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The matter has gone through the trade commissioners. It's been approved. I happen to support the government's position on CETA, and I happen to support the government's position on supply management, which is different than my colleague, of course. The whole issue of the Belgium issue took us by surprise. It took everybody by surprise. The next issue, it has to go through the European Parliament for a vote, and then it has to go to the individual member states for a vote. So my question to the member is whether he has any recommendations to the government in case there are more surprises where the vote might be defeated in the European Parliament, or it might be defeated in one of the member states. So my question is whether he has any recommendations to what the government can do to ensure that there would be swift passage through the European Parliament and the 28 individual member states.
Good question.
The honourable member for Elmwood, Transcona.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think, the Belgium issue caught a lot of people surprised, Liberals and Conservatives especially, because they weren't paying attention. People have been criticizing the investor-state dispute settlement clauses in these types of agreements for a long time. So it wasn't a surprise to New Democrats when we found out that people in Europe were looking at those same issues and saying that they had a problem with them. It's not a surprise if you look at the model of the European Union. that is a very integrated model and yet doesn't have the same kind of investor-state dispute settlement clauses that are governed by the corporate elite, Madam Speaker. So if you've been watching and paying attention to the way these deals have been playing out, it wasn't a big surprise. And the best way to try and head off further surprises is to take your time, that is not rush it through Parliament here, to start listening instead of dismissing these concerns as being unreasonable, and then to change the agreement to get rid of those problematic provisions, Madam Speaker, and then you'd get people on side in Europe.
Resuming debate.